There we go. And here we go. Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we have a dear friend of ours, Peter Abrams, aka Spencer Quinn, who's back with a holiday-themed Chet and Bernie mystery called It's a Wonderful Woof, another great title. Peter, aka Spencer, has signed a whole bunch of them, and he's actually used both of his names here. I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field on both YouTube and Facebook, should you like to order a signed copy. And I'll also be monitoring the questions. So if you have questions for Peter, go ahead and put them in, and Barbara will summon me towards the end of the hour, and I'd be happy to ask Peter any of your questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I hope you noticed that Patrick mentioned Facebook and YouTube, because we decided after the Facebook disaster of a couple of weeks ago that we would stream live to YouTube as well as to Facebook. So you have a choice.
We wanted to do it for a long time. So
we have, but it sort of kicked our butts, to get it done. And of course, we will also have a podcast. So this series is particularly beloved to us because, I mean, we were there for its inception. Actually, we were there before its inception. And I love the fact that that the Chet and Bernie series takes place in what's called the Valley with a capital V, but it's really Scottsdale. Yay. Thank you, Peter. It's so much fun to read about. So it must have been a terrific challenge to write a Christmas book set in Scottsdale.
Well, it's only, it's Arizona, and it's a Scottsdale-like place. And there's the whole valley as well, with the huge metropolitan area, and then all the surrounding wilderness. And that's, from the beginning, I wanted Chet, who's the narrator of these stories. He's a dog, and Bernie is a detective, and Chet tells the story in the first person, but he's not a talking dog. He's a narrating dog, as purely canine as I could make him. But yes, because what is Christmas without snow? Now, in Scottsdale, it's very, very unlikely you're going to get it.
Let me interrupt and tell you that we had an unusually cold winter. We actually had a snowstorm. I have pictures of snow draping our cactus out front.
Wow, that's great.
But it didn't last long, and you're absolutely right. It does not look like Christmas in Arizona.
There are other parts of the state where you can find.
You bet. Flagstaff has already had snow. Flagstaff is a ski resort.
So the book takes place partly in the valley area, but also partly in surrounding desert and surrounding wilderness, and even a surrounding ski place.
Right.
So I was able to get some snowy scenes in there when I needed them. And it's funny, I don't know if this is true of other writers, but who maybe have little things they like especially to write about and are just drawn to writing them whenever they can. And one of mine is scenes in snow. I just love writing adventure type action scenes in snow. And so as soon as I knew I was going to be writing a Christmas book with Chet and Bernie, I knew there was going to be some kind of wild snow scene. And when a book is a project and it's a long project, but if you have little sort of picnics to look forward to, little literary picnics along the way, it's a huge help. And so when you finally get to the avalanche and all this stuff going down, it's kind of, you could close the circle. And also you're then writing about something that you're really confident about. Writing about snow is something I'm confident about doing. Probably why I like it. I mean, the two are intermarried.
I love that. Of course, you live in New England, so obviously snow is, a feature. But honestly, we do have the northern part of Arizona, which people don't necessarily think about. Flagstaff is at either 7,000 or 9,000 feet. I can't remember which. And there's a couple of old volcano mountains that are like 12,000 feet. So, I mean, it's a serious ski area up there, and they already had their first snowstorm last week, and it's 2 hours from Phoenix. You go north and you drive up over the Mogollon Rim, and I-40 sometimes coming across the north of Arizona closes in the winter when there are real storms. So, it's not improbable that if you have an Arizona book, you could have snow scenes. But still, I can see that you want to reward yourself as you were writing this. So is this your first Chet and Bernie Christmas book?
Yes, it is. It's my first Chet and Bernie Christmas book. Now, I have to point out that it was from the publisher's viewpoint. I think they are, although the cover is quite Christmassy, they call it a holiday book. I'm not.
Okay, well, and that makes perfectly good sense because there are a number of faiths embraced. And, the holiday season in Arizona embraces many faiths. It's
absolutely. So what this is, it's actually a Christmas novel with a touch of Hanukkah. There is several important Hanukkah-related scenes in it.
Excellent. I'm really delighted to hear that. Well, I knew it because I read it, but I'm glad that you mentioned that to other people. We have very large gatherings, family gatherings that come here from other parts of the country to celebrate the holidays at Christmas. And in fact, the whole Kellerman family, Jonathan Kellerman and Faye and Jesse and so forth, who are Orthodox Jews, came to Scottsdale many times for a whole, the Scottsdale Marriott had a whole retreat for Hanukkah. And, or maybe it was Passover, but I think it was Hanukkah. Anyway, that's where we got to be friends. And now we've been friends with them for a long time. And Rob and I have been invited to spend Passover with the Kellermans next spring, which I would like to do because I've never been to a Passover ceremony. My husband, who is Jewish, knows even less about it than I do. So it'll be an initiation for him. And we'll see how that works out. So Chet the dog is an unreliable narrator in a wonderful way. I mean, you see the world through Chet's eyes, and he adores Bernie. And so I love the whole point of view with Chet, who can easily be distracted and who may not always be fully clued in to what's going on.
No, I mean, that's absolutely correct. And I didn't realize how much fun it would be to write this character. It's really sort of taken over most of my writing life. And every time, it's not that I go around in normal, let's say I'm on my bike ride or I'm playing tennis, that voice is not in my head. But when I sit down to start writing, it's there like that. There's no, this sort of agony. I'm not saying it isn't agony. Writing, to anyone out there watching right now, who wants to write novels, writing is agony, but it's the writing in the voice of Chet is the least kind of agonizing agony that you can imagine. So yes, he's an unreliable narrator, but that's an interesting thing all on its own. Now, I'll just backtrack a bit. It's a Wonderful Woof. It begins at a Christmas party, a very wild Christmas party in a seedy part of the valley. And as Chet and Bernie are leaving, they're in this alley, and there's a sort of fight going on where this very little guy is getting badly beaten by a big guy. And Bernie breaks that up immediately and makes sure that the big guy will never do such a thing again. And notices that the little guy is actually a fellow private eye named Victor Klovsky, who Bernie is very surprised to see in a violent situation, because this private detective Victor is mostly just a researcher. And so Bernie rescues him. And then not long after that, a potential client shows up, and he has a case that seems to have to do with research and Baroque painting. Bernie's not even clear on it, but it's not the kind of thing he and Chet do. So they foist this client off on Victor. They give Victor Klovsky something to do, and it's not going to be dangerous, they don't think. Anyway, so Victor Klovsky becomes like this character. Now, the name Victor Klovsky is based on Victor Shklovsky. This is getting complicated, but it'll fold back into your question, Barbara. It turns out that there's some academics who have an angle on the Chet and Bernie series that that they say the Chet and Bernie books are an example of defamiliarization.
Of what?
Defamiliarization. Defamiliarization is a literary theory propounded by Victor Shklovsky, not Victor Klavsky, I stole the name from that, who was a Russian literary theorist and around 1900, 1910. And his whole idea was that the purpose of the artist is to take familiar material, defamiliarize it, and sort of recycle it that way. And in that way, you show a new understanding. And I'd like to say that the Chet and Bernie series was deliberately written to illustrate his theory. But of course, I'd never actually heard of him. But that's what is really happening here with Chet and Bernie. And I think why one of the reasons readers like it is that, readers like dogs and they like humor and stuff like that. But to see the world defamiliarized, you begin to understand it in ways you hadn't known before. And I think that's part of the appeal.
I'm sure you're absolutely right. And, it's very hard to write a humorous series without it turning into caricature, because so much of the time what happens is you have to keep escalating things in order to keep the humor going. But because there's just natural humor involved in Chet and Chet's view of the world and his view of Bernie, you don't have to do that. The books have stayed on I don't even know how to describe this exactly. You haven't had to turn it into farce. It has remained a constant, which means that people can bond with it and stay with it and not get tired of it. As if you think back to Laugh-In or something like that on TV, they have fairly short life cycles because after a while, it was really hilarious in season 1 or 2, but by season 4, it was so yawn, there's Lily Tomlin again.
Well, they even have a term for this difficulty, and it's jumping the shark, right? Which came from TV. Yes, your point is excellent, Barbara. And if you're right, and I really hope you are, the reason is that I'm very strict with myself about advancing the story. These are mysteries, and I don't want anything I write. It has to be advancing the story. In other words, I don't take a break from the story to write a scene that's just comic or just whatever if it doesn't serve the purpose of driving the plot forward. So everything in the book drives the plot forward, and if it happens to be in a humorous way, that's great. But as you say, most of that I think comes from the situations that Chet is in and his response to them. But these situations are all situations having to do with mystery writing. And so the most important thing to me in all the books is that there's a good mystery.
Well, you're a nifty thriller writer. I was addicted to your thrillers long before you ever started writing this. I mean, we've mentioned Peter Abrahams, and Peter had a wonderful array of thrillers that he wrote. And so, you were a terrific plot guy. And I'm not at all surprised that you didn't think that is a primary engine. And, but some of the humor too. I mean, Bernie is an interesting character. I mean, we're looking at him from Chet's point of view, but if you try to stand aside from that, say, who was actually Bernie Little? He's a big guy, right? So, that we know about him. He's not, he's a kind guy, he's a charitable guy. And he gets himself into situations, he's not really money first, as a businessman, he's pretty much a flop. Which we know about from the Hawaiian Pants episode, but beyond that, he does things because they're right or because he wants to help people as much as he does things, for a fee. And Chet, invests Bernie with this aura of love and only partial understanding of how it's all going, which I think is a wonderful filter, for a guy like Bernie, because he could be just kind of a schlub, but he's not.
No, well, yes, you're right about that. And one of the things that Bernie never does, I think he's one of those people I think there are fewer and farther between, who is incapable of talking himself up. He's incapable of settling himself. And it leads to, these career difficulties and difficulties with women and all sorts of difficulties. But Chet, to you, the reader, not to, people in the world of the book, but to you, the reader, Chet talks him up constantly. So,
yes, right.
so
Chet thinks more of Bernie than Bernie thinks of Bernie.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, Chet loves Bernie, but Bernie loves Chet too.
Yeah,
he
does.
And
you're a dog owner. I'm a dog owner. I mean, today we tried to teach the puppies how to use the doggy door, which involves getting behind and going shove, and they're picking it up, but they're only 4 months old, so they're tiny bit slow. But what you already know, even with a puppy so young, is how much they love you. Dogs are, that's a great reason to own a dog. Whenever you come home, there's somebody happy to see you.
There's somebody, yes, and
I think he's frozen for a minute.
English aristocrat who can't show emotion, they can really show emotion. So it's fit in terms of what I wanted to do. It fits perfectly, and it has a lot of potential in it, in the relationship. And of course, in terms of detection, and everything that goes into a mystery, all sorts of things I can do because of Chet's extraordinary senses, especially hearing and smell, that, you won't, I don't think there's anything in all of Raymond Chandler having to do with sense of smell. How
you have a real good, I mean, there actually was years ago an elderly woman named Virginia Lanier, I think her name was, actually wrote a series where bloodhounds were significant players. And, Jan Burke wrote a book about cadaver dogs. And, there have been plenty, Sarah Paretsky's books have dogs in them, although I don't think they actually help. But no question that a dog's sense of smell, we all know that they can be trained for drugs, they can be trained for cadavers, they can be trained for medical things. People with diabetes and other things have dogs, that helper dogs that can sense things. And so, I can imagine that it's an enormous help from time to time when you're working on a plot to know that Chet might sniff something out.
Yes. It often happens when I eat it, but there are other, I think there's of Mutts and Men, which was 2 Chet and Bernies ago. There's a scene in a hospice with an old guy who has cancer, and where Chet sort of takes him across the river, and the sense of smell is very important in a scene like that.
Absolutely true. And also he's a big dog, and if you don't know him, if he really was angry or, defending Bernie or something, he can be pretty scary. I mean, we know he's kind of a marshmallow, but, some bad guy where Chet's going, wouldn't necessarily know that.
No, and there are in conflict, and there have been conflicts. I mean, he's capable of incredible feats, physical. He's very strong. He's 100. Well, all we know about what he looks like is what he's picked up from listening to people who are rude enough to talk about his appearance in front of him. So, he knows that he's 100+ pounder. He's a mix of some sort, and his ears don't match. One's black and one's white. And that's really all he knows. But we do know that he's a big and very.
That's a clever thing, because, oftentimes authors, in order to give us some sense of what a person looks like, have like a scene where the guy's looking in the mirror or, something like that. But with Chet, Chet can't do that, right? He can't report how he looks if he's checking him out in the mirror. But you're right, from the bits of things that people say, he forms some kind of impression, and therefore we do too. We don't even know for sure what Bernie looks like. I mean, we know he's big and whatever, but Chet isn't able to be that precise. He can't say like Bernie is, a redhead with, a beard and curly.
No, we do know a few things. Bernie has eyebrows that Chet loves and that speak a language of their own. We know that Bernie's nose is not quite straight, but he's not going to get it fixed until his days of getting in fights are over. And Chet hopes that never happens because he likes to see that sweet, sweet uppercut of Bernie's. And we know that Bernie also limps a bit at times. And on his leg, he always wears long pants. And one of the legs, on one of his legs, he has a wound that he suffered overseas in the army. So we know that about him. And then whenever they run into an old army comrade of Bernie's from those days, even ones they haven't seen in years, these men all immediately come over and hug him and thank him. So we know that Bernie did something heroic overseas, but he never talks about it, and we don't actually know what it was.
Well, that's good. I think to leave some of the backstory kind of just, hints is a wonderful thing. So in the past, in an earlier Chet and Bernie, I can't remember which, there was a saguaro that featured, and many people think that saguaros just go randomly across a swath of the Southwest, but they don't. They really live in the high Sonoran Desert. And so as part of this book, there is a trail, and it takes people to the ruins of a mission called Nuestra Senora de los Saguaros, which means Our Lady of the Saguaros.
Yeah.
Which, in a way, were you thinking of the White Dove of the Desert, the beautiful Baroque cathedral in Tucson, or did you just make this one up?
Well, I mean, I thought of it, but I made it up. I didn't want it to look like that, but yes. That's what I was.
Well, no, I understand that, but I mean, it's a wonderful, and interestingly enough, the Yaqui Indians, it's on their land, or at least part of their land. Mm-hmm. So when you go there, it has the towers are very different for some reason or other in the architecture, but there's usually a group of the Yaqui selling things,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, that's the way cathedrals were. They were commercial centers as well as religious centers in medieval times.
Well, it was the religious aspect that, well, in terms of the plot, and I don't want to give too much away, but so Christmas Story. Now, when you right away you think of, the Christmas Carol, Dickens. I mean, Dickens made Christmas what it is today in many ways. That book was so important in terms of how we, at least in the Anglo sphere, celebrate Christmas. It was very important for that. But one thing he didn't do, so I was very interested in that aspect of Christmas. I thought it was for Chet and, generosity of spirit and giving and that type of thing just fit into Chet and Bernie very well for me. And that comes, you see that in a Christmas Carol too. That's what it's really all about. But in Dickens, there's nothing actually about the religious aspect of it at all. And I thought, is there a way in this modern day and age to kind of inject a little bit of that into the story? And I thought about, when I went to college, art history was my favorite subject. It was the only one where I went to class. If it was art history, yes. Otherwise, no. So, and I loved it. And one of my favorite painters that I knew nothing about till I took art history was Caravaggio. And his dates when he lived, around 1600 are very important dates when it comes to Spain and the New World and moving into, explorers and the missions, and the very early ones coming into Arizona and California. And I began to think a kind of what if having to do with Caravaggio. And then I thought, what would be an interesting painting, that could somehow play a role? And I thought of the biblical story of the flight into Egypt, where you have this terrified little family crossing a desert in a foreign land. Now, if that doesn't speak to us right now, terrified little family, desert, foreign land, I thought, wow, what if, and I just thought of this painting, this flight into Egypt with a saguaro in it. Okay, there are no saguaros in Egypt, there are none in the Middle East. They're only found in the Sonoran Desert and in a few little parts of California, actually, too, but mostly in the Sonoran Desert, which is in Mexico and Arizona. And so those were and I thought, so there's a real little Christmas present inside It's a Wonderful Woof. And I won't say any more about that.
It's really interesting. I was reading when I can get up for a minute, I'll go get it because I could show it. An interesting book about how fraud and conflict and so forth have actually advanced art. And there are lots of examples, but Caravaggio was a real roisterer. I mean, he was kind of the, who's the playwright, Christopher Marlowe, very, very similar kind of a guy.
Well, yeah, I mean, Caravaggio was a murderer among.
Well, yeah, and and he was killed. I don't know, but he took religious painting, and I can show an example of it. Was much more static, and Caravaggio gave it a dynamism. I can speak to the background that there's a famous painting, so I'll go get it and I'll show it to you in a minute. And so, yeah, he's, everybody hopes because he had such an itinerant, roisterous life, there's always the hope. Daniel Silva wrote about it too. There's always the hope that there's a lost Caravaggio.
Well,
there might even be several lost Caravaggio.
There have been, and there was one found, I think, in Scotland in some old mansion, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I think there's almost no question that there must be a few still out there. His life was so disorganized and wild. And so he actually fits into a murder mystery very well.
No, he absolutely does. If you want a rogue artist, I mean, he really was. I think I've also thought that's one reason there's so many books and quite a few mysteries about Christopher Marlowe. We don't even know precisely how he died. I mean, we have accounts that, and I've been to the tavern in Deptford. You go down, if you sail down the Thames from Greenwich to London or the other way, you pass Deptford, and they always point it out. I mean, he's been dead for 400 and some years, maybe more now, 500. And yet the spot where he died, we think, and we're not even sure why. They claim it was a dispute over the bill. But, there are a zillion things. He was probably an agent of Francis Walsingham. So he was a spy. He was a homosexual at a time when that was a death sentence if they caught you. There are so many things about him. And some people would like to think that he actually wrote Shakespeare or parts of Shakespeare because he was so incredibly gifted. So, somebody like that, Caravaggio is kind of the art version of Christopher Marlowe.
Yes, there are a lot of similarities for sure.
Yeah, there are. So anyway, I love it that you were able to bring that in.
When I began this series, I had no idea how much thematic material could be slipped in to a dog narrated series. And for me, in terms of crime fiction, I want there to be thematic material. If there isn't, then I just don't feel that the net has been cast wide enough. So nowadays, thematic material, and you think right away of noir fiction because, it's full of thematic material, at least, well, again, mentioning Raymond Chandler. Some of the thematic material in It's a Wonderful Woof, though, is not, there's a noirish sensibility, but there's something very hopeful about what's going on. And so to me, to have something a bit hopeful in the book is almost subversive now, because just in our climate, where there's so much vitriol and conflict and over the top temper tantrums, that seems to be the norm. In sort of Raymond Chandler's time, it was sunny California, and he showed you the dark side. Well, in a book like It's a Wonderful Woof, it's not a sunny world, but we're showing you the sunny side, I think. There are
certainly studies that show that over millennia, pandemics have made people crazy.
Yeah.
There's serious. So we've had, a political. Well, we've had politics that made people crazy. We've had doom scrolling. We've had, all of that. And then we have a pandemic that has made people crazy. And basically, what we have, to a great degree, is adults having temper tantrums, or even worse, adults. The rate of, homicides, shootings, just crazy
Suicide.
stuff has gone skyrocketing, and it's like a double whammy of real life events, and of political and economic events, and then the whole aspect of the pandemic. Public health has become political. How did that ever happen? I can't even. It's just nutty. And so you're right. It's wonderful to have a book that instead of dwelling on all that, talks about, helping people and generosity and,
Well, and just in a small way overcoming it. So that's what I wanted to do. And I myself plan to enjoy Christmas a lot this year.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. I certainly hope that we all will before we launch into another insane political year.
Yes.
I'm all for term limits. I have to tell you that I think that the system that we have is just breaking of its own weight, because it just comes around too often.
Oh, I'm not ready.
No, but I think term limits would be a tremendous boon for everybody. And that way, when people are elected to office, they are not, the first thing they do is to start running again for office before they ever actually do anything. So anyway, I wish I could see it in my lifetime. At my age, I probably won't, but I think the system may break, or it'll have to be reformed one way or the other. Anyway, I love this. Now tell me this, since you worked in an extra book for Chet and Bernie, i.e. a Christmas book, you've normally been bringing them out in July. So is that going to interrupt your usual schedule, or did you manage to get one in and not interrupt your usual schedule?
Well, Bark to the Future is the next Chet and Bernie, and it isn't going to be coming in July. It's going to be August.
Oh, that's just a month. I mean,
yeah, it's only a month. It's only a month. Yeah. So, and I found something that really interested me. It just popped to start this one off. So I'm very pleased with it so far. I'm almost done.
Well, I think that's wonderful. Do I have some dim recollection that you were thinking about writing a Peter Abrahams book too?
I have. After Bark to the Future, I am going to be writing a Peter Abrahams book. It's called Mrs. Plansky's Revenge.
Oh, I love the title.
Thank you. I'm not going to, because I haven't written it yet, and because the premise is pretty juicy.
Got it. No, that's all we need. I just wanted to confirm the fact that I recalled.
Yes, no, you're right. You can confirm it. And I don't mean to be coy.
No, I wasn't taking it that way at all. It's really hard to talk about a book you haven't even started to write. So I think we're there. But I'm pleased, because I really do love your Abrahams books. And I think also when you've written a lot of books in one vein, it's kind of nice to open a different vein and see what flows out,
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, I'm going to open a different vein for that. For sure.
I love it. So I'm going to call Patrick up, and while he asks you a question, I'm going to go and get my Caravaggio.
Okay, great.
And when I get up, because I paused a moment to put a pillow behind my back because my back hurts, you will get to admire my particular pillow, which I absolutely love. I have to turn it around first because I obviously put it up the wrong way. But there you are, Peter, in your honor. You can't see it.
I can't see it.
There it is.
Oh, that's great.
Right? It was my mother's. She bequeathed it to me. So
anyway,
I'll be right back with Caravaggio.
That's great. Let's see, Peter. Yeah, we've got some people tuning in, and let's see here. Al wants to know, did Peter play baseball? Maybe you just enjoy baseball.
Well, I played baseball, but not at a high level. I played Babe Ruth baseball. That's what comes after Little League, the age that comes after Little League.
I see.
So my career ended, I would say, at the age of 15. But I love baseball. I've always loved it. I love the game, and I still do. So Bernie, yes, okay. And this question probably, Bernie pitched for Army. He went to West Point,
Right.
and he pitched for Army and blew out his arm. But to Chet, when they play fetch, he thinks that Bernie still has a cannon for him.
Gotcha.
Thanks for that question.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So this is a Caravaggio. And look at the background of it. Look how different it would be from, I mean, this is not a religious painting, obviously. This is
Yeah, that's Bacchus, right?
Relatively sexy. But on the next page, he talks quite learnedly here about that is Caravaggio Vincent Amor Omnia. But this is what I think is really interesting. This is Baglioni, who was influenced by Caravaggio. And look at that, at the gorgeous color and so forth that comes along. And then this is a different kind of a view of it. I mean, obviously you can see it better in the book, but I think that you can see the influence of Caravaggio is just phenomenal.
Oh, he's had an influence on filmmakers too. Scorsese for a while.
Right. Anyway, he's I thought that you'd be, and this one, which I really love, this is Caravaggio's idea of a religious painting. This is the conversion of Paul when he was Saul.
Oh, I love this painting.
Roman legionnaire on the road to Damascus. Look at the horse.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the horse is
the horse is incredible. Yeah. Thank you for that.
It's a wonderful book. It's called The Devil in the Gallery, and by Noah Cherney. And the subtitle is How Scandal, Shock, and Rivalry Shaped the Art World. And, and push people into advancing art in different directions. So he thinks it's all a good thing that fraud and other stuff happen. This is a seminal book for you.
Yeah.
So some more questions here. A couple of people are mentioning, the wonderful kids books that you've done, Arf, Woof, and Bow Wow. Any plans for a new one?
I have no plans at the moment for a new one. I love, I just love writing for kids. And if I can squeeze in more, if a good opportunity comes up, then I probably will. There's nothing like the sort of mail you get from kids. I think as classroom projects, they sometimes have to write actual letters, real US mail letters that then show up in my mailbox. And there are these wonderful letters that they write, and sometimes go on, and sometimes they take over the characters in the book themselves. I don't know what the assignment necessarily, what the teacher has told them, but sometimes they do little scenes of their own with the characters, and they do illustrations. I mean, I love this stuff, but the best that I ever got was, I think I can remember it word for word. I have to do a report on your book. Please tell me the story in your own words. That was my favorite. It put me right back in 5th grade.
That's great. Although I don't know, it sounds like that kid was working an angle.
Oh, for sure. Well, you must have known kids who worked angles. They were angle workers back in 4th grade, for sure.
You bet.
Not me.
Susan asks, could you imagine Chet being a character in someone else's book? And if so, whose book?
Whoa, what a question.
Yeah.
They would hear from my lawyer, but I can't, he's sort of part of me. So it's almost like saying, can I imagine me in someone else's book? And I mean, and to me, that's a little scary.
Let's see. Actually, have you ever been approached, and of course, for film or television? And is there a dog actor that you've heard of that could play Chet?
Well, I mean, the Chet and Bernie have been optioned a number of times. Option is like a Hollywood rental of your work. I've had that happen. A dozen books probably, but only one was ever made into a movie, and that was called The Fan. And just harkening back to that baseball question, it was a sort of crime novel that took place in the world of professional baseball. And in the movie, Robert De Niro played the fan. But to imagine, I can't imagine a Robert De Niro type dog, really. Although,
Well, they used a computer dog to remake The Call of the Wild.
Okay.
Because there really wasn't any way that
Mhm.
that you could use a real dog for a lot of the scenes that
Right.
they did. And I thought my husband thought that it was a little artificial. I thought it worked pretty well. But if you really think about it, if they were going to make Chet and Bernie, you might really find that a computer dog,
It might be a
computerized dog,
computer dog.
would make the most sense, because
Okay.
to train a real dog to be Chet would be virtually impossible.
It would be really difficult. It would be really difficult.
On a similar note, Al asks, is Chet totally fiction, or was he inspired by a police academy dog?
No, he was not inspired by any one police academy dog. He's totally fiction. He's not based on any of the dogs we've had, but I could never have written the character had we not had dogs. Just lived with them. I wasn't using them for raw material. And I don't think anyone should get a dog for that reason. It was for Barbara said, to love the dog and have the dog love you. And with kids, our kids and the dogs, it just all goes together. And you're sort of taking, when you have a little combo like that, you've taken one step on the road to happiness. So, but I have, what does a writer do? Well, I sit here in my office where I am right now, and, I wait for something to occur to me. And meanwhile, outside where I can see them, however many dogs we had at the time, they're there doing whatever they do. So I didn't watch them and take notes or anything like that. Just through osmosis, I think I learned a lot about dog behavior. So where we live, next to a salt marsh, there's lots of wildlife here. Occasionally coyotes would appear, and the dogs, which were sizable, would drive them off courageously. I love the way they did that. So that would be something. I'd see how they did that. I'd see how they hunted for squirrels and never caught one. And I've even seen one of them getting very close to a squirrel, and all of a sudden an osprey, these big seabirds, came zooming down and took it just when my dog was about to spring. So you see stuff like this, and comedy, tragedy, everything occurs to you, with what you could do with it. So having dogs, yes, was not the inspiration, was the raw material. But Chet is not based on any one dog. No.
I'm going to add a note too, which is that we have had individual dogs, but this time around, the breeder of our puppies, the little cavapoos who are adorable, we were interested in one, the boy dog, who has this adorable face. If you look at our Instagram account, you will see the dogs rambling around in it. But she brought along the litter mate, the last remaining dog, this little black female who's basically kind of homely compared to her brother. I mean, he's the star, and my husband loves difficult women. So he was instantly attracted to the little female dog. But my view was in part that she might be left behind because she wasn't so appealing, and I didn't like that to happen to her. But I also thought, they'd been together. They were not quite 3 months old. And, they'd always been together, and how interesting it would be to see them grow up together rather than to split them up and never know what would happen. I mean, Rob says I anthropomorphize this a bit, but I didn't want Scooter to always wonder what happened to his sister, and vice versa. Now, you probably that's a ridiculous, and he never would have. But
I don't see it as ridiculous at all. But
we have both of them. Is my point.
Yes, I love the idea I love the fact that the reader just happened to bring the two.
No, it wasn't. It just happened. I know that her ostensible reason for coming, and I commend this, is that I think she wanted to make sure what kind of a home her puppies were going to go to. She didn't want to just like mail him off, or have us go pick him up and not have any idea what his home life would be, because she clearly really loved them. But I also think that in the back of her mind, she thought, well, if I take them both, there's a chance.
You never
but
know.
What's interesting is to watch the dynamic between them. As they're out there rolling and somersaulting and all the rest of it, always together, always doing this. They're very different dogs now than they would have been if we had just had the one.
Yes.
Because there wouldn't have been that socialization, there wouldn't have been that play, they wouldn't have had this fun. So the older dog has been really put out by this, because there's two against one, and she's not at all clear what she wants to do with it. Plus, she's a lot bigger, because she's not very big. She's only 25 pounds, but compared to these little guys, are now 8 pounds, we're 4.
Yeah.
She's a giant. Yeah. So it's interesting to watch her, but they take her on together, sort of like your deal about the coyote. And I'm not sure how one of them would have dealt with her, but the two of them have her on the run much of the time. It's just wonderful to watch the whole thing. So you're right. I walk past and I look out at the window into the yard and I see all these somersaulting dogs. And I think, isn't that great? And it makes a big smile. And I just feel happy.
No, absolutely. And for them, first of all, they're getting puppies. If they get all this exercise, they nap a lot too.
They do. And they pee a lot, unquestionably.
Oh.
It's just like,
peeing is big in the dog world.
They're our third new mop head, aside from everything else.
There's a whole, there's almost a language of peeing in the dog world. There's quite a bit of it. One thing about the Chet and Bernie books, I've never written about pee as much as I have in these books.
Yes, and just as a final note, because there are two of them, when you put a pee pad down, which is ostensibly there to collect the pee, they think it's a toy. So they grab it, and it's like a tug of war. And meantime, it's shredding all over the place. So it's a nightmare to clean it up. So we started today on teaching them the doggy door, which means you have to basically push their little butts out and hope they figure it out pretty soon. So you didn't want to know all about this. Sorry.
No, I did. That's good. I like anything dog. The pee pad, I could probably use that. I don't mean at home. I mean in a Chet and Bernie store. I'm
sure you could. Maybe you could have code or something on it, and the dog shred it before they could read it. There's a lot of possibilities there. Right, Patrick, you have dogs.
I have one dog now. We had a greyhound a couple of years ago, which I just loved that dog. And we have a black lab, kind of a mutt mix. What I wanted to ask you is that, it seems like a lot of people are either cat people or dog people. There is a group of us, myself included, who are both. And, we have a house where cats and dogs live together kind of, I want to say seamlessly, but it's amusing to watch. You've written a little bit about cats, have you not? You did a short story.
I've written a very little. Okay, so the sort of a Chet and Bernie seminal story is there's a short story called "A Cat Was Involved" that's available like on Kindle and all that. It was written somewhere in the series. Chet refers often to the day that he met Bernie for the first time. And it was the day that Chet flunked out of canine school. It was the very last day, and he flunked the very last test, which was the leaping test. And leaping is his very best thing. And he has very few memories of what went wrong. All he remembers is that a cat was involved, and there might have been a bit of blood. That's all he remembers. So he refers to it a number of times, and then finally, I wrote up that day, and it turned out to be a day with a wonderful silver lining, because although he flunked out of canine school, it was the day he met Bernie. So it was actually, this day of failure was the best day in his life. is what he
Oh,
considers.
wonderful. I love that, the way you did that. Patrick didn't mention that the Poison Pen actually has both dogs and cats. We have a dog that comes to work every day. We have a dog that comes to work on Saturdays and other random times, different dog. And then we have cats that live outside the bookstore because during the Great Recession, people turfed out their pets, and we developed a pod of feral cats. And there's really nothing you can do to reclaim them once that happens. So we feed and water them. So
Are they
dogs
around
on
the
the
back?
inside and cats, running around the outside. And
Yeah.
I don't know, Patrick, do they ever clash?
No, no. There's a core group of, I'm not even sure how many, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they eat quite well from going from restaurant to restaurant down here
Mhm.
at Lower
Well,
Scottsdale.
but we put out cat food and water
We
for
do.
them.
Oh, yeah, no,
So yeah, I mean, it's a place, and there are lots of bushes and, handy places for the cats. And when we had live events back in that time, they would often curl up on the hoods of people's cars, to stay warm, if it were colder weather. So, but anyway, the cats are on the outside, the dogs are on the inside, and, and it's a lot of fun. Are there any other questions, Patrick?
let's see. Yeah, Vicky mentions, she says Bernie's neighbor and his dog are a fun part of your books too. It's more of a comment, but
Well, yes, so that would be Mr. and Mrs. Parsons, an elderly couple who live next door, and they're in failing health. And they have a dog named Iggy,
Iggy.
and a little yapping dog. And Iggy is Chet's best pal. And very occasionally, Iggy escapes and they get to have a little playtime together.
Let's see. Okay, I'm kind of flipping back and forth between YouTube and Facebook, and Paul on YouTube. He just makes the comment, "What is dog spelled backwards?" Indeed.
Good point.
And he says, and this is something we all face as animal lovers. Will you write about Chet as an aging dog?
Okay, that's a great question. I confronted this fairly early, and I made the following decision. No, Chet is not going to age. Things around him may change, but he's the same age in every book. He doesn't lose his powers at all. So this series can actually be read in any order. But no, I didn't want, okay, as any dog owner knows, and I don't even like dog owner, but as any person living with dog knows, our lifespans don't match up very well. But that's just a fact on the ground, and I didn't want it to intrude too much. So I think it was early in the series, I think it was in the first book, Chet has one of these little lumps that dogs sometimes get, and it's biopsied. And I thought, well, I'm going to do a kind of Shaggy Dog type thing and not have the results of that biopsy come till the next book. Or even maybe I can extend it to the one after. Right after that book came out, with no resolution on the biopsy. It was the biopsy report. The biopsy had been taken, but there's no report from the pathologist. I began to get emails in all caps. If anything happens to Chet, I will never read another word you write. So that was like a little warning to me about what might happen if I allowed, Chet to kind of age a little too much. And the other point is this, I don't mind inducing tears in a reader, but I don't want to do it cheaply. And I don't think there's anything cheaper you can do to start the waterworks flowing than to kill off a dog. And if I'm going to get tears out of the reader, it's going to be through something harder to do than that. So that's my answer on that.
Well, it's like all of us have our own experiences with that, with what you're talking about. And so, we don't want to necessarily experience that on the page. I think.
That's what yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like Chet, his spirit, he just represents something, something that endures. It's not almost like not particular to one dog. He's just, I'm getting off into the esoteric realm here, but
That's okay. I can deal with that. No, Patrick, it's a good, the thing is, these are not cozies. If we've given the impression, or if I've given it, dark things can happen, and dark things can happen to Chet. But what I've noticed is he bounces back to his reset position very quickly. And that reset position, speaking to what you just said, Patrick, is one of joy in life. And I'm sure, just from what I see on Chet's Facebook page or the blog, Chet's blog, that's one of the things that readers respond to.
sure.
Absolutely. And dogs live in the moment. Dogs don't carry grudges. Dogs don't sulk. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about them.
Absolutely.
They really do.
Right.
They're just always there, full of love and full of joy.
And they go with the flow, I mean, we could learn a lot from them.
Yes, absolutely true.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Well, Peter, it's really been a joy to talk to you. As ever, an hour has flown by. So thank you so much for spending some time with us. I want to thank all of you who've watched us for your patience and for your questions. And we still have about a dozen autographed copies of It's a Wonderful Woof, which make an excellent gift for somebody on your list. Peter is right that you could start at any point with these books. You could certainly start with this book, which is what, the 12th, I think.
13th, I think.
13th, okay.
No, 12th. Forget what I just said, 12th, yes.
No, I counted right before. Wait, did I miss? Anyway, it's an excellent gift idea. And Peter would actually sign more books if we oversell this, because he's good about that. So feel free. I'm going to say that October is the new December, because the supply chains everywhere are so terrible, and the postal system is entering a phase that makes it slower than the old Pony Express. So if you really want to shop, I would recommend that you think seriously about doing it into the early part of November, or you're going to be disappointed. So this is an excellent book to think about. So thanks, Peter, very much. Thank you, Patrick. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Patrick. Really nice to see you both again.
Always good to
And
see
you,
Peter.
always.